Hey guys, Wolfie here and welcome back to the channel. As always, the usual disclaimer, any opinion here is mine and mine alone. Now, this video, the reason why it is like this is because I have quite a bit to go over here. Now, to be more specific, this is my opinion on the future of Square Enix. Now, you guys are probably wondering, WTAF, and the answer to that will come throughout the nature of this video because there's a lot to go over, believe it or not, especially some of the stuff that Square Enix has done in recent years. Meaning that there is some quote-unquote controversies. I will have varying links, and I will be mentioning some Twitter profiles that bring some key information to light here. So that's that on that. I will have varying links in the description below, alongside a YouTube video by Young Yeah, because he does bring up something. He had a video on one of the topics I will be addressing here, and it's something that I do think that, in short, Square Enix may want to start looking at their board of directors and making some changes from the top, if that makes any sense. So this could be a bit of a longer video. There's going to be a lot of pausing because that way you guys get to see certain things without me revealing my personal information. Now, I do apologize if the audio is not syncing up, so just go along with the photography and also turn on your closed captioning so that way you guys can at least see what I'm saying. Now, this is one of the things I do want to point out. Now, this is for one of Square Enix's mobile games, Final Fantasy VII, The First Soldier. Now, you might want to, pause the video and just, take a screenshot and then so you can zoom in with this, because, some of the print here is kind of fine. People might have a hard time reading it, so I'm going to read it here, what they're saying in this particular post below. It is with a heavy heart that we are announcing the end of service for Final Fantasy VII, The First Soldier. We will be ending service at 7 a.m. UTC on the 11th of January 2023. So the end of life here for this particular mobile game is approaching its what's known as the EOL, or end of life. The thing to keep in mind with mobile games, especially mobile gacha games, is that these don't have much of a shelf life. Now, you may look at one of their other titles, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, the City of Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Those two are still ongoing for beyond the usual shelf life of around 4 to 5 years, but those two will probably be seeing their end of life at some point in time. You don't want to count that out. Now, this joins one other game that has recently reached the EOL on at least the global side, and that is Final Fantasy Record Keeper. Those two games also join another mobile gacha game called King's Knight. Now, granted, this was a Squaresoft game originally for the Nintendo Entertainment System 8-bit, but they came back with a mobile version of that game. And the thing is, with King's Knight, the mobile version, that one had a shelf life of less than a year. Now, this type of trend should be concerning for Square Enix, considering when you look at the budget aspects, the finances sort of thing, because some companies can bring in millions and millions or even billions of dollars, United States currency, but the question remains, how are you using the funds you're given? Are you distributing the funds in a balanced way? Because if you're not using them to make sure the mobile games are running decently amongst other important factors for mobile games, it only goes to show that mobile games will only last so long, maybe 4 to 5 years. If it goes beyond the 5-year mark, that means there's something else in play that's keeping it alive for that long. And with games like this adding on to Final Fantasy Record Keeper and King's Knight, all those mobile gadget games having reached or are about to reach their end of life, it is extremely concerning because, this kind of puts the board of directors or whatever Square Enix has on notice, but not in a good way. Are they trying to make so much money but not deliver quality games? Because there are more and more people who are wanting quality games that are complete with as few issues as possible. That's not a difficult request to honor. And it seems like Square Enix might not be doing their end of the bargain, in my personal opinion, because if you have 3 games in recent years having reached their end of life on the mobile market, it may be a wake-up call to Square Enix to reevaluate that department, as much as I don't want to say it. Now, another thing I want to address is some of the bundles that Square Enix has had on their merchandise store. And what's concerning here is that things like this, as well as this other one, and mind you, this is the collector's edition for Final Fantasy XVI. It's coming out summer of next year. Is that the price tags for each of these bundles are in the triple digits. Now, when it comes to now, this particular one, it is the pixel remaster of the first 6 of Final Fantasy games, which were Nintendo exclusives, quote unquote. And over time they done games for other systems, including Microsoft and now PlayStation, as well as PC. Now, I've looked at some people commenting on Twitter, where a lot of the bots are buying these and reselling it on eBay for way more than the asking price. And it's currently unknown if Square Enix is really doing anything to combat this, but something tells me they're not. And this is a bit of a repeat of what particular item that does make things a lot more concerning. Now, I will go into Final Fantasy XVI later on in this particular video because there is some information, about system exclusivity, Xbox, that I do want to go into further detail. But for bundles like this to be as expensive as they already are, I know this. I had to double check the exact numbers here, but they're both for the bundles for both of these games. They're both in the triple digits, as it is already. But like I said, I have seen people comment on Twitter where this particular bundles are being resold on eBay. And if Square Enix is not doing anything to combat the bots and scalpers, you're talking about potential law violations of sorts, because here in the United States, there was recent legislation that went into effect at the beginning of this year, but there is some brand new information with this particular piece of legislation that really won't go into effect until 2024. Now, there is a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act where on tax returns is that those who sell places like eBay, Mercari, and the threshold is 600 United States dollars. So this is a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act where if the sales you make on Mercari or eBay is at least $600, and you're using payment plans like PayPal, Venmo, Zip, Cash App to pay for it, there's tax paperwork that you're going to need. So they did postpone that requirement, quote unquote, for another year, because they want to make a transition. And I do feel that is the right call. You know what? You want to make sure things are done gradually as opposed to like straight shoot. But scalpers do need to be careful, because when it comes to that 2023 tax returns, which is the beginning of year 2024-ish, this is something that scalpers have to be extremely careful of because of that. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that there are places like eBay and Mercari having their own terms of service. Now, to be more exact here is that when it comes to pre-orders, one is likely not allowed to sell a pre-order on eBay. And that is an eBay terms of service, because if you're selling stuff like this on eBay, and again, this is pretty much the TLDR version of their terms of service, is that once you buy something off of eBay, the merchant has 30 days to send it. And again, when it comes to scalpers and bots, you do not want to be caught posting a pre-order on eBay because of the terms of service, so that they could be easily looked up. And then the whole thing with price gouging, that's a potential terms of service violation. So to scalpers and bots, y'all have been warned. Now we're going to go into things that are pertaining to recent history with Square Enix. Now, a bunch of information I'm about to reveal here is 100% from memory. Young Yeah has covered this in the past. One particular video, I'm going to try to do at least a couple of videos, one for each like major year, in the sense, if that makes any sense. So just be patient with me on this. I ask you guys. So the first year where Square Enix has really got themselves into hot water in recent times was actually late 2018. So what happened here was that this involves both Final Fantasy XV, the main series, and a spin-off Type 0. Now, what happened in late 2018 was that Tabata, I kind of forgot the person's first name, so bear with me. So late 2018, Tabata left Square Enix to create his own company, JP Games. Now, around this time, Square Enix lost 33 million United States dollars. And this also, and by all of this affected not only Final Fantasy XV, but also the sequel to Final Fantasy Type 0. Now, to be a little bit more exact here is that with Final Fantasy XV, they had to scrap 3 of the 4 planned DLC content. DLC is the downloadable content. And they also had to scrap the support for the PC version of the game. And this was relatively heartbreaking in the sense of like, Final Fantasy XV is pretty much known as the incomplete game, in my personal opinion. Now, regarding the Season 2 aspect, Dawn of the Future, that was reworked into a novella. So that's why I didn't mention the Season 2 content right out of the gate. And like I said, it is heartbreaking in that regard because, like I said, it is an incomplete game in my personal opinion due to the complete scrapping of 3/4 of the planned downloadable content and the reworking of Season 2 into a novella. Now, that's not the only game that it affected by that loss, and the reason why I mentioned Type 0 was because they also scrapped the sequel to Final Fantasy Type 0. Yeah, you heard it. And I did not stutter. They scrapped the sequel to Final Fantasy Type 0. And from speculation around that time, the Type 0 sequel was revolved around one of the endings. Meaning that it was not the quote the true ending or the bad ending or the alternate ending. It was based on one other ending. And that was 2018 alone. Now, fast forward 2 years. We're going to go into the year 2020. Now, Square Enix had a $100 million United States dollar budget for a game known as Marvel's Avengers. Now, I do not know if they ever recovered that entire budget in its sales since, but around the time that game got released, they had a pretty nasty loss with that too. And the exact number will depend on your journalistic source, because some people are saying 48 million United States dollars. The other number is around 61 to 63 million United States dollars. A pretty big loss. And this kind of ties into what I'm going to be mentioning a little later on in this video, meaning that some aspects of system exclusivity, which is a controversy in its own right, no matter which platform you have. So that's 2020. It was a 100 million United States dollar budget Square Enix had for Marvel's Avengers. It fell flat on its face for quite a variety of reasons. Now, in between that time, we're going to look at Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. Now, it is, because of really bad sales, less than 500,000 copies sold, and system exclusivity plus performance issues with the game, we are not going to be seeing any more Dissidia entries on consoles, meaning that all the waits for that series to survive right now is Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia on the mobile platform. It's a mobile gacha game. Now, I am an ex-Opera Omnia player. I only play the global version due to my work schedule. And that's the TLDR of why I don't really play JP, is because I just have a chaotic work schedule. And that's also unpredictable. So it's one of those things where it's like, you have a mobile gacha game now, carrying the entire weight of a series that really didn't do well to begin with in the sense of sales. Now, what I mean here is that if you look at the original Dissidia game, it was about 1.8 million units sold. Then you have the Duodecim 012, which sold 900,000 copies. But it didn't stop them from making NT. And again, it was pretty much the next game sold around half of the previous game, if you follow that line of thought. There were so many issues with NT, and then you also top it off with the system exclusivity. It just it was like they couldn't do it anymore because the numbers were just too low. And this is on top of performance issues. So we have that, and that's in between that time frame. Now we're going to go into this year up to this point, 2022. Now, Square Enix got themselves into a pretty nasty controversy involving NFTs, non-fungible tokens. This is tied to crypto, and the thing is with crypto that people don't really like about it is that not only is it too complex, it's also harmful to the environment in the format of global warming, meaning that raising outdoor temperatures by about 2 degrees Celsius or 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty sad in itself, considering that a good chunk of the United States right now is in a pretty nasty aftermath of a snowstorm, including where I'm at. And I remember seeing a tweet on Twitter from my governor to conserve electricity until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Yeah. That's something you don't really want to be caught, being tied to. Now, the whole thing with Square Enix and their ties to the NFTs, it costed them 200 million United States dollars. Now, Young Yan has covered this info quite extensively, in my personal opinion. He also did a follow-up video where Square Enix had to sell a lot of their studios for 300 million United States dollars to make up that loss. So they only gained 100 million United States dollars back at the end of that mess. Which means, at this point, Square Enix might want to look at the people higher up. Why are they not making good, sound decisions on this? Because you're wasting so much money, you're not getting much of it back. And it seems on years that end in an even number, this is going to make things worse for Square Enix before it gets better. And some people may want to start looking at the higher ups. Why are they more interested in money as opposed to delivering quality products? And in this case, quality games. Now, outside of all of that, we're going to go into Square Enix's history of excluding platforms for some of their games. Now, if you look at the first Final Fantasy, the first 6 Final Fantasy games, this is where you can completely understand to an extent why Squaresoft at the time only could release to Nintendo, because there's really no competition, so to speak. Instead of directional pads, buttons to press, you don't really have that much at that point. Like the late 80s, early 90s. As time went on, systems got better, you had more buttons to press, more things you can do. And this is where Square Enix ventured out into different platforms. Because there was a point in time, and I'm not referring to the Final Fantasy VII remastered on the Switch or the Final Fantasy VIII remastered on the Switch. So I'm not going to be including those because those came on way later dates. There were other systems that Squaresoft at the time were using. PlayStation, they could have gone Genesis or Sega Saturn, but they chose not to. And this is all the while excluding Nintendo out of the equation. Now, if you look at Xbox 360, they released some Final Fantasy entry games into the Xbox 360 platform, which includes the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. And we now know that Xbox is now being excluded from getting any more Final Fantasy games or any games coming. Let me rephrase this. When it comes to the Final Fantasy games now, Xbox is no longer getting anything from that, from the Final Fantasy franchise. And you're kind of wondering how or why. We're going to be revealing that right now. Now, this is the information that I caught on Twitter a couple of days ago. So it looks like Square Enix has Sony signing contracts that excludes Xbox from getting certain games, which includes the Final Fantasy VII remake. Now, the actual Twitter account that kind of brought this to light is known as Xbox News for Koreans, which they go by the Twitter handle Korea Xbox News. So they're the ones who mentioned this, and this is the actual link that was given. You press on this, it gives you the entire document you can read on your own time. It is more than 100 pages. Now, according to Korea Xbox News, and I will show this part right here, is that Microsoft has already told CMA that Final Fantasy VII Remake cannot be released on Xbox. This is because Sony has signed an Xbox exclusion agreement with some third-party publishers for several games, including the remake. Which, that particular tweet is in conjunction to this. Xbox fans, what's going on with Square Enix in 2023, because it looks like Square Enix is very much picking and choosing what platforms get which game. Which sounds very hypocritical of Square Enix nowadays. And the reason why I feel that it's extremely hypocritical for Square Enix nowadays to even do something like that is because of their history of excluding platforms in the past. Meaning that if you look at Final Fantasy VII when it first came out, there was also Sega Saturn and some of the other, and I want to say it's either Nintendo GameCube or N64. They could have released something from them for that platform too, but they simply chose not to. Now, this is one of the articles that I was referring to from Twitter. So you guys get to see exactly what's going on. So this is what they're mentioning here regarding certain games, all that stuff. And there's one other article here that they're mentioning that Xbox is being excluded from varying games. Now, in all fairness, Xbox has had something going on with Bethesda. I'm not going to get into that because there's something that's I don't have any expertise in that matter, if that makes any sense. So I'm not really going to go into it. But I will say, though, Square Enix is being kind of hypocritical. And to make things more interesting for this video, we're going to go into the console aspect of this now. PlayStation 5 is not doing as well as people think. And I'm going to reveal the reason why. So I did this right here. And that's what I exactly typed in. As you see here, is PlayStation 5 still hard to get? Now, when people bark on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, saying, oh, you should just if you want to play this game, get a PlayStation 5. Now, that would be, it's easy to say, hard to do. Because you notice here, quite a few places are saying a PlayStation 5 is still hard to get. It's harder to get than an Xbox. And for me, I was able to secure not one, but two Xbox Series S consoles. One of them was a giveaway. The other I found on Mercari for MSRP. And that other one was a feat in itself. So I consider myself very fortunate to have found a Xbox Series S for MSRP. And I'm just super glad to have landed it when I did. But again, if you have something like this that's hard to get, it's going to affect sales. Now, people may want to deny this, but it is true. How can you go after something if it's not easy to find? Now, I will have this particular article in the description below. Now, this is something that's really important, and I'm going to be going into Final Fantasy XVI now. Now, for some people may not be aware, Final Fantasy XVI will be the first main Final Fantasy title that has the M rating. Now, the reason why this article is relevant is because we're going to look at countries equivalent to the ESRB in the United States. Now, the reason why this is extremely important is that there is a possibility that this Final Fantasy XVI could get banned in some countries for their respective rules on what's acceptable to be sold in their countries and not. Now, one game that got banned in a few countries was Mortal Kombat 11, and that was recent. Now, you'd probably be surprised to know that Japan was one of those countries that has banned Mortal Kombat 11. You heard this correctly. Mortal Kombat 11 is banned in Japan. And that is because of what Japan, has in their rule books for what is acceptable to be sold in Japan. It's also banned in mainland China. Because if you look at mainland China's rules for what's accepted, what's not accepted to be sold in their respective countries for video games, it's very similar. Now, regarding the bans in Ukraine and Malaysia, it is for different reasons. So something that Square Enix and Sony have to keep in mind with a game that has an M rating is they may have to make some tweaks in order to make sure it can be accepted in certain countries. When it comes to games with an M rating, this may face some roadblocks in countries where they're pretty strict with the rules. One of them being mainland China, the other being Japan. And if you look at Germany, they have like what's known as a timed ban or a partial ban. But it's one of those, it's like, this is something where Square Enix and Sony will need to tread lightly on. And this is the tweet right here they were mentioning about the whole thing with like console sales. Now I'm covering the person's photo here, and this is something I actually agree with. So they're saying here that PlayStation 5 isn't doing so hot in Japan. Now, this was about Japan. Square Enix would be making all their games for Nintendo. Now they also added here, PlayStation 5 might be outselling Xbox, the Series family, by a ratio of 5-1, but Nintendo Switch has been outselling PlayStation 5 by at least 20-1. Meaning that in Japan alone, Nintendo's where it's at. Nintendo is selling their systems like hotcakes. More so than PlayStation, more so than Xbox. Which is kind of shocking considering that Sony supposedly moved their headquarters from Japan to California. Meaning that Sony is more or less an American company now as opposed to Japanese. And Sony has their own rules on what can be accepted into their games, which aligns with Square Enix in all fairness due to their ethics department, as far as I'm aware. Now for a collector's edition, bundle here for $16. I mean, even if I had a PlayStation 5, I would not be shelling out this much money for this. And it's something that I would not even consider pre-ordering. Now, the reason why I'm not going to go pull that trigger is for a simple reason, and that's known as Bayonetta 3. Now, some people are loving it, really, whatever. However, I was watching streams of somebody playing it, and I noticed there were some varying performance issues that people are flat out ignoring. And that itself is really sad. When it's like there are clear and distinct performance issues, It felt very rushed. The soundtrack was questionable, and people are still praising that.